Some dreams will make the world turn its back on you, but if you hold on to them, they might just save a nation. In the scorching land of Canaan, where dust clings to your sandals, and goat bleats echo through the dry wind, a 17-year-old boy walks with the most colorful robe anyone's ever seen. His name is Joseph, the 11th son of Jacob, but the firstborn of the one woman Jacob truly loved, Rachel. That alone made Joseph different. But it wasn't just about love. Jacob favored him clearly, openly. He gave Joseph a long robe with many colors, something no other son had. It was a gift, but more than that, it was a warning sign of division, jealousy, and the storm about to break loose. While his brothers woke up before sunrise to herd sheep, slept under the stars, and lived with the smell of sweat and dirt, Joseph stayed close to home. He was trusted with lighter tasks. Worse yet, he was a tattletale. Whenever his brothers did something wrong, Joseph reported it back to their father without hesitation. Needless to say, his brothers hated him. But then came the dreams. Joseph didn't dream of random nonsense. He had clear, vivid, almost prophetic dreams. And worse, he shared them with everyone. One morning he told his brothers, "I dreamed we were binding sheaves of grain in the field. And suddenly my sheaf stood upright and all of yours gathered around and bowed down to it." He said it like it was nothing, like it didn't mean anything. But it meant everything to a group of older brothers already sick of this so-called chosen little brat. Then came another dream. This time Joseph said, "The sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." Even Jacob, his father, the one who usually defended him, looked uncomfortable. "Are you saying your mother, your brothers, and I will one day bow before you?" Joseph didn't answer. He didn't need to. To him, the dreams were not arrogance. They were a calling. Something big, something world-changing was coming. But his brothers didn't see a calling. They saw a threat. And then the chance came. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to the distant fields to check on his brothers and bring them food. Joseph packed a basket, wrapped himself in that vibrant robe, and headed out completely unaware that this journey would shatter everything he knew. The sun beat down hard as Joseph walked toward the distant fields, his colorful robe fluttering in the wind. He wasn't thinking about danger. He wasn't thinking about betrayal. He was just doing what his father asked, bringing food, checking in on his brothers. But they had already seen him from a distance, and the sight of that robe was enough to push them over the edge. "Here comes the dreamer," one of them muttered. Another scoffed. "Let's kill him." They weren't joking. Years of silent resentment, bruised egos, and envy had built up. Joseph had become a symbol of everything they hated, the favoritism, the arrogance, the dreams. But not everyone agreed with murder. Reuben, the eldest, stepped in. "No blood. Let's not kill him. Just throw him in a pit. Let him rot." He secretly planned to rescue Joseph later and return him to their father. So when Joseph arrived, all smiles and peace, he didn't see the danger until it was too late. They grabbed him. The basket of food hit the ground. Dust flew up. Hands pulled at his arms, at his robe, ripping it from his body, like tearing away his identity. And then they dragged him across the dirt and threw him into a dry cistern, a deep pit carved into the desert ground. No water, just darkness and silence. Joseph lay there stunned. His robe, the only thing that marked him as special, was gone. His brothers, his own flesh and blood, had turned on him like wolves. Above they sat eating lunch. Yes, they literally ate lunch while their brother cried out for help from the pit. Then came a dust cloud on the horizon, Ishmaelite traders heading to Egypt. Judah, another brother, had an idea. Why kill him and cover it up? Let's sell him. Make some money off the dreamer. The deal was quick. 20 pieces of silver. That's what Joseph was worth to them. They pulled him out of the pit not to rescue him, but to sell him. He screamed. He begged. But the rope tightened, the hands pulled harder, and his fate was sealed. He was just 17, and now a slave. As the caravan disappeared into the desert, carrying Joseph away from everything he knew, his brothers stood with nothing but silver in their hands and silence in their hearts. But the lie wasn't over. They took Joseph's robe, tore it, dipped it in goat's blood, and brought it back to their father. Jacob saw the torn, bloodied fabric and collapsed. "It's my son's robe," he whispered. "A wild animal must have devoured him." And just like that, the dreamer was dead in his father's eyes. But Joseph was very much alive, bound in chains, dragged across scorching sands, with no clue that this nightmare was the beginning of his destiny. Egypt, a land of towering pyramids, scorching heat, and ruthless ambition. The caravan brought Joseph into the heart of this empire, where he was sold again, this time to a man named Potiphar, captain of Pharaoh's guard. A military man, disciplined, powerful, dangerous. But Joseph, he didn't crumble. Even in chains, even in a foreign land, he worked hard, rose quickly, and caught Potiphar's attention. Everything he touched seemed to prosper. Fields yielded more. Livestock grew fatter. Ledgers balanced perfectly. There was something different about this Hebrew slave, so Potiphar gave him more and more responsibility, until one day Joseph wasn't just a servant. He was in charge of everything in Potiphar's house. But with power came attention, and someone else had started watching Joseph too, Potiphar's wife. She saw his confidence, his youth, his strength, and soon her curiosity turned into desire. She began tempting him day after day. "Come to bed with me," blunt, brazen, dangerous. But Joseph refused every single time. "My master trusts me with everything. How could I betray him? And more than that, how could I sin against God?" He wasn't just resisting a woman, he was resisting the easy road, the silent compromise. And then it happened. One day when the house was empty, she cornered him. She grabbed his robe again with the robe and tried to pull him down. But Joseph ran. He left the robe in her hands and bolted out the door. Humiliated and furious, she flipped the story. She screamed. Servants rushed in, and holding Joseph's robe like a piece of evidence, she pointed and lied. "That Hebrew slave tried to assault me." The lie spread like wildfire, and Potiphar, furious, betrayed, had Joseph thrown into prison. No trial, no questions. Just cold stone walls and iron bars. From a favored son, to a slave, to a prisoner. It felt like the bottom of the bottom. No robe, no voice, no freedom. But even in prison, Joseph didn't break. He helped. He served. He interpreted the moods of fellow inmates like he once interpreted dreams. And the warden noticed Joseph wasn't just surviving, he was preparing again for something bigger than he could imagine. The prison was cold, damp, a place where time moved slowly and hope faded fast. But Joseph remained steady. He wasn't just another inmate. The warden saw his integrity, his calm presence, his wisdom. Before long, Joseph was put in charge of the other prisoners, even while being one himself. One day, 2 new men were thrown into the prison, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker of Pharaoh himself. No one said what they had done. Rumors swirled political betrayal, a failed plot, a spoiled meal. But Joseph didn't ask. He just noticed something others didn't. They looked disturbed, shaken, restless. "Why do you look so troubled today?" Joseph asked. The cupbearer sighed. "We both had dreams last night, strange ones, but there's no one here to interpret them." Joseph leaned in. "Interpretations belong to God. Tell me your dreams." And so they did. The cupbearer dreamed of a vine with 3 branches that budded, blossomed, and produced grapes. He pressed the grapes into Pharaoh's cup and handed it to him. Joseph smiled. 3 branches mean 3 days. In 3 days you'll be restored to your position. You'll serve Pharaoh again. The baker's face lit up. "Okay, my turn." He dreamed of 3 baskets of bread on his head, and birds were eating from the top basket. Joseph's expression changed. He paused, then spoke softly. 3 baskets, 3 days, but you won't be restored. You'll be executed. 3 days later, it happened exactly as Joseph said. The cupbearer was returned to Pharaoh's court. The baker was gone. As the cupbearer left the prison, Joseph said just one thing. "Please, remember me. When you're with Pharaoh again, mention me. I was taken from my homeland. I've done nothing to deserve prison." The cupbearer nodded. "Of course, I won't forget." But he did. For 2 whole years, Joseph stayed in that prison. No word, no rescue. The man he helped forgot. It would have been easy to give up, to say, maybe the dreams were just dreams. Maybe I was wrong. But Joseph didn't. He stayed faithful. He waited. Because sometimes being forgotten by men is exactly where God starts setting up your breakthrough. And that breakthrough, it was closer than anyone imagined. 2 years passed. Joseph remained in prison, unseen, unheard, seemingly forgotten. And then, in the palace above, Pharaoh had a dream. Not just a dream, a nightmare. One that woke him in cold sweat. One that refused to leave his mind. In it, he stood by the Nile River and saw 7 fat, healthy cows come up from the water and begin grazing. Then 7 skinny, sickly cows emerged behind them and devoured the fat ones. He woke up disturbed, then fell asleep again and dreamed a second time. This time 7 full golden heads of grain grew on a single stalk. After them came 7 thin, scorched heads, which swallowed up the healthy ones. Pharaoh sat up in bed. The dreams haunted him. They felt urgent, so he summoned every magician, every wise man in Egypt. He told them the dreams, but no one could interpret them. Not a single soul. That's when the cupbearer, standing quietly nearby, finally remembered. He stepped forward hesitant. "Your Majesty, I'm reminded of my failure. When I was in prison, there was a young Hebrew man. He interpreted my dream, and it came true. Exactly. Pharaoh's eyes lit up. Bring him, now! So they pulled Joseph out of prison, rushed him to bathe, shave dress in fine linen. In minutes, he went from a dark cell to standing before the most powerful man in the known world. Pharaoh looked him over. I hear you can interpret dreams. But Joseph didn't take the credit. I cannot, he said, but God can, and he will give Pharaoh the answer he seeks. Pharaoh told Joseph both dreams. Joseph listened, thought, then spoke with confidence. The dreams mean the same thing. God is showing Pharaoh what is about to happen. 7 good cows and 7 healthy heads of grain represent 7 years of abundance. But the 7 skinny cows and the withered grain represent 7 years of famine. He looked Pharaoh in the eye. A great famine is coming. It will follow 7 years of plenty, and it will be so severe that people will forget the years of abundance ever existed. Silence. Then Joseph stepped further. Let Pharaoh appoint a wise man to oversee the land. Store 1/5 of all harvests during the good years. Build reserves. That way, when famine comes, Egypt will survive. The room held its breath. Pharaoh looked at his officials. Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? And then it happened. In a single moment, Joseph went from prisoner to prime minister. Pharaoh gave him his signet ring, royal robes, and a golden chain. He put Joseph in charge of all Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. The robe that had been ripped from him by jealous brothers was now replaced by one fit for royalty. And just like that, the dreamer became the ruler. But Joseph's story was far from over, because soon the famine would come, and with it, so would the brothers who betrayed him. The famine hit just as Joseph said it would. 7 years of abundance had come and gone. Egypt's storehouses built under Joseph's leadership were full to the brim. While other nations began to starve, Egypt had grain, and people came from everywhere to buy it, including from Canaan. Back in his homeland, Jacob and his sons were struggling. The fields were barren, the food was running out. So Jacob called his sons the same brothers who had once sold Joseph for silver, and said, I've heard there's grain in Egypt. Go, buy some before we die. 10 of them made the journey. They left behind the youngest Benjamin. Joseph's only full brother Jacob couldn't bear to risk him. They traveled dusty roads, crossed deserts, and finally arrived at the grand storehouses of Egypt. And there, dressed in fine robes, wearing Pharaoh's seal, standing high above them, was Joseph. But they didn't recognize him. Why would they? The boy they betrayed was now a man, a ruler. He spoke Egyptian, not Hebrew. He wore gold and power. But Joseph recognized them instantly, and in that moment, years of pain, betrayal, confusion, and heartache came rushing back like a flood. He could have revealed himself. He could have screamed, punished, even banished them. But instead, he stayed silent. He wanted to know, had they changed? Were they the same jealous, ruthless men who had thrown him in a pit? So Joseph devised a test. He spoke through an interpreter. You're spies. You've come to scout our land. They protested, afraid. No, my lord. We're honest men. We're brothers. The youngest is home and one is gone. Gone. That word hung in the air. Joseph kept his face unreadable. Bring your youngest brother here. Prove your story. Until then, one of you will stay in prison. He chose Simeon and bound him before their eyes. The rest returned to Canaan, stunned, afraid, and with a secret gift. Joseph had returned their silver, hidden in their grain sacks. Back home, Jacob was heartbroken. He refused to let Benjamin go. I've already lost Joseph and Simeon. I won't lose another son. But the famine didn't stop. And eventually, he had no choice. He sent Benjamin, and Joseph would finally see his little brother again. But the test wasn't over. They returned, this time with Benjamin. When Joseph saw him, his little brother now grown, his heart nearly gave out. He excused himself, rushed into a private room, and wept. Not just tears of nostalgia, but years of buried emotion crashing to the surface. He composed himself, washed his face, and came back out, mask back on. He ordered a feast. His brothers sat in astonishment as the Egyptian ruler arranged them in birth order. How could he know? And then when food was served, Benjamin's portion was 5 times larger. Still, Joseph wasn't done. He instructed his steward fill their sacks with grain. Return their silver again, but this time hide my silver cup in the youngest one's sack. At dawn the brothers set out for home, relieved, joyful, unaware. Then they were stopped. Joseph's men caught up to them and accused them of theft. We would never steal, they insisted. If one of us did, he will die, and the rest of us will be your slaves. But the steward said, whoever has the cup will stay. The rest may go free. One by one the bags were opened, until they reached Benjamin's. There it was, the silver cup. Shock, horror, despair. They tore their clothes, an ancient sign of grief, and returned to face the ruler once again. This time it wasn't about survival. It was about loyalty. Judah stepped forward, the same brother who once suggested selling Joseph. But now his heart was different. He spoke. Please, my lord, don't take the boy. Take me instead. My father will die if Benjamin doesn't return. I gave him my word. I can't break it. Joseph broke. Years of pain, betrayal, and silence couldn't hold back the flood inside him anymore. He stood. The room fell still, and then, in perfect Hebrew, he shouted, "Everyone out! Leave us!" The guards, the servants, everyone vanished. And then, "I am Joseph." Silence. His brothers froze. "Is my father still alive?" No one spoke. Their faces turned pale. Their world cracked open. Joseph walked toward them, tears streaming down his face. "You meant it for evil," he whispered, "but God meant it for good." And then he did the unthinkable. He forgave them. He embraced them one by one, especially Benjamin, especially Judah, especially the ones who once sold him for silver. The dream had come full circle, but this time it wasn't about power, it was about purpose, and it was always about grace. Word traveled fast. When Pharaoh heard that Joseph's brothers had come, and that his family was alive, he ordered wagons and provisions to be sent to Canaan. "Bring your father, bring everything. Egypt will be their home." And so Jacob, old and nearly blind, heard the words he thought he'd never hear. Joseph is alive. He didn't believe it until he saw the wagons, until he saw the grain, until he saw the faces of his sons, humbled, changed, and finally united. Then his spirit revived. "It is enough," he whispered. "My son Joseph is alive. I must go see him before I die." The reunion was unlike anything anyone had seen. Jacob arrived in Egypt, trembling with age, leaning on a staff. Joseph rushed to meet him. The man who had once wrapped a bloody robe in his hands now saw his son alive, powerful, tear-streaked and smiling, running toward him. They fell into each other's arms and wept for a long, long time. For 17 years, Jacob and his family lived in Egypt, 70 souls in total. They were given the best of the land, Goshen, and they flourished. Before Jacob died, he blessed each of his sons. But when he came to Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, he did something symbolic. He crossed his hands. The younger son received the greater blessing, just like Joseph, just like the dream. The world may reward the oldest, the strongest, the most obvious, but God often chooses the unexpected. Years later, when Jacob passed away, Joseph's brothers grew afraid again. What if he only spared us for father's sake? They came to Joseph, fell to their knees, and said, "We are your servants. Please forgive us." And Joseph wept again. "Don't be afraid," he said. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to save many lives." He didn't just forgive them, he restored them. He provided for them, protected their families, loved their children as his own. Because Joseph had learned something in the pit, in the prison, and in the palace. Sometimes the dream takes longer than expected. But the pain, the betrayal, the waiting, it's all part of the purpose. And when you surrender it all to God, even the worst moments can be redeemed. From betrayal to breakthrough, from prison to palace, from dreamer to deliverer. Joseph's story isn't just about one man. It's a reminder that your story, no matter how broken, can still be beautiful, because the dream doesn't die. It just waits. Joseph's story teaches us that pain doesn't cancel purpose. What others meant for evil, God can use for good. The pit, the prison, and the betrayal weren't detours, they were preparation. Joseph didn't just survive the storm, he learned to lead through it. In a world that celebrates instant success, Joseph reminds us that the waiting season is not wasted. It forges character, deepens faith, and prepares us to carry what's ahead. So whatever pit you're in now, don't give up. God may be building something bigger than you can see. Your story's not over, it's just getting started. Have you ever felt forgotten, like Joseph in prison? What helped you hold on to faith during the hard seasons? Share your story in the comments. We read everyone. Your testimony could be the encouragement someone else needs today.